Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the host of the Grief to Growth podcast. Today we've got with us Kelvin Chin. Kelvin and I have been friends for several years now. We've done a lot of collaborations together. Kelvin has taught me meditation. He's also taught me about the afterlife. He is one of the foremost experts that I know in both of those areas. So I'm going to read a real quick bio of Kelvin, and then we'll get started. So Kelvin has been helping people navigate their lives more easily and smoothly for over 50 years. Throughout his life, he's focused on helping people find new techniques and new ways of thinking, helping them to be more self-sufficient and effective. And that's one of the things I really like about Kelvin. He really helps people to be more self-sufficient. He's not trying to become your guru. He's trying to empower you. Kelvin was taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Kelvin's learned TM, transcendental meditation, from him. Kelvin has since gone on to develop his own form of meditation called Turning Within, which I think we'll probably talk some about today. He's taught meditation through to the military, through West Point Academy, the U.S. Army in Korea, and on the DMZ. He's taught people of all ages and all walks of life. He's also taught people a lot about the afterlife, about reincarnation, and really helped people overcome the fear of death by becoming more familiar with who we are, why we're here, all those things that we always talk about in Grief to Growth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelvin, let him talk about what he's got to speak about today.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Always good to see you. Brian and I met, it was actually in the context of what we're going to talk about today. I'll mention how we met. We met through the IANDS conference in 2019 at some point. So what's that, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
And I spoke there, and Brian has spoken at all these conferences too, as you guys probably know. Brian speaks a lot at a lot of different conferences. And I spoke at that conference. That was the first time I'd ever been to an IANDS conference. IANDS stands for International Association for Near-Death Studies, for those of you who don't know that. It's a great organization, IANDS.org. I'll give them a little promotion. You can check them out. But I spoke there for the first time, for me, speaking at their conference in 2019. That's where Brian and I met. And my history personally with the afterlife and so forth kind of is just spontaneously happened with me when I was a lot younger, 45 years ago. It just opened up. Some things started opening up for me very spontaneously. I didn't have a belief system that supported my experiences, so I started having to try to figure stuff out myself, quite frankly. I went to church when I was a kid, but I went to church because my parents told us we had to go to church. It's like they wanted to get rid of us every Sunday or something. I don't know. So I went to Sunday school and so forth, and I heard it was Christian. It was a Christian upbringing, Protestant and so forth church. And, I heard all the stories and so forth from the Bible, et cetera. And I just thought they were nice stories, and they were, to help teach people and so forth. But I never took it very literally, is my point. And I didn't really think that there was an afterlife. I thought it was kind of a hopeful, wishful thinking thing for people to kind of make them feel better and that kind of thing. That's how I thought about it when I was a kid growing up. Until I started having my own experiences that I couldn't explain otherwise. And so, as Brian mentioned, I started meditating when I was a teenager. So I was very young. I started meditating. I learned TM back then and transcendental meditation, and it really helped me get over my anxiety. That's why I learned. I did not learn for spiritual reasons. again, I was still in this not believing in afterlife kind of belief system at the time. I just learned because I was highly stressed out. And so I get a lot of students now. I've been teaching meditation for over 50 years now, 68 countries now. I teach on Zoom and on the phone and so forth. I get a lot of students who are very stressed out, but I get other groups of students who are more looking to understand about the afterlife and maybe even get their own experiences with the other side, communicating with dead loved ones and so forth. I know Brian also and we've overlapped and so forth, met through Helping Parents Heal, the group, and so forth and so on. And then my heart always goes out to parents who've lost their children, or anybody who's lost any loved one for that matter. So the meditation I found that I teach also helps people in that regard, even though when I learned, I didn't even believe in that. So my history goes back to the meditation, helping me open up to my own personal conscious development of my own conscious awareness, I guess you would say, and then my releasing of my stress and so forth. I had an NDE a couple of years into meditation. I almost drowned in the ocean off of San Diego in a rip current. And the meditation really saved my life because I popped out of my body, but I had already had experiences of my mind and my body not being the same. I'd already had in my meditations had experiences of being unaware of body and surroundings, and then had other experiences where I actually felt like my mind was really much more expanded than it had been before I learned to meditate, et cetera, et cetera. So when I had that nearing death experience, you might call it, when I almost drowned and I popped out of my body, it was like, whoa, what was that? That was, unusual, but not unfamiliar, I guess. And so I put myself back into my body. My mind put myself back into my body right away. And I struggled back to the surface of the ocean and saved my life. Swam in the couple of miles in that I was pulled out in the middle of the ocean, by the rip current. So several years later, I started having past life memories. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is this class that I'm going to start teaching again on September 29th. So in a couple of weeks, I have this 6-part series. Brian mentioned that he's taken the class, and Brian, you can jump in anytime and talk about, what we'll talk about, what's different about what I teach in terms of that class. But it's a class on afterlife experiences and reincarnation experiences, and what can we learn from about ourselves and about the afterlife and about the universe through looking at it through these lenses, and through the lenses of my experiences and other people's experiences who will come and share their experiences in the class as well. So that's every other week, starting on Sunday, September 29th at 10 a.m. in the morning Pacific time, 1 o'clock on the eastern seaboard of the U.S., and then Europe and so forth, different time zones, et cetera. It's a live class and so forth, 6-part series, a couple hours each class, every other Sunday, starting September 29th. But I'm basing the classes based on through the lens of my experiences and my interpretations of my experiences, what I've learned about reincarnation through my memories going back now 6,000 years. This is my book here, After the Afterlife, which I have 3 books, which we briefly touch on today. But that one, I talk about my memories that go back 6,000 years, about 24 lifetimes. Most of which are just unknown people. There's a few of lifetimes that are of historically known people, but most of the lifetimes, 20-something of the 25 lifetimes are unknown people. I don't know who I was, but I have explicit memories that go back 6,000 years, starting in Sumeria as a businessman there, in ancient Sumeria. In the mid-1980s, I spontaneously opened up and started communicating with the other side, or they started communicating with me, is how it happened. I wasn't looking for it. And just like I wasn't looking for past life memories surfacing, I never had I still have never had a past life regression. I just spontaneously opened up and started having these experiences. Same thing with communicating with the other side. And so now it's been, what, 40 something years or whatever, communicating with the other side. It's just very normal to me. I've had thousands and thousands of communications with the other side over these 40 years. So I've had a lot of different touches, we'll call them, with different beings on the other side. Some I knew known, some of I have not known. So I have I say that because I have a because of so many touches, we call them touches in business. When we have a touch, you touch someone, you touch a being on the other side, this side, whatever, you have a touch in business. I've had so many of these touches, we'll call them, that I have a breadth and diversity of experience that I share with my students in my class to give them different perspectives on how certain things seem to be on the other side from my side, from my experience. Whereas some people may have had an NDE and had one NDE, and then they're talking about their experience, and it's based on one experience they've had. I've had thousands. So, and it's not that they're wrong in terms of what they're saying. But it's a perspective based on a limited data set, we'll call it, in our more normal 21st century language. Whereas my data set is huge. Just from having all these years of experience this lifetime, never mind in other lifetimes. So that's kind of an overview of my background and where I come from and what we're talking about today. And just to let people know, if they're interested and curious, they can go to kelvinchin.org, my website, and go to the Afterlife page and check out some preview videos of what I'm going to talk about in the classes, which we can talk about today here too, Brian. So,
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to chime in from what you said, because it's interesting to me. You mentioned that your parents sent you to church, but your parents weren't Christian, right? I know your father wasn't.
Yeah, well, my father was not Christian. My mother was. She went to Baptist church when she was growing up in Chinatown in Boston. My mom was. And my father grew up in Chelsea, Massachusetts, in a very Jewish community. Those people know back whenever he was there, when he's growing up in the 20s and 30s before he went to World War II overseas in the U.S. Army. But it was very Jewish. Chelsea, Massachusetts was very, very Jewish. And there was like an interspersing of Chinese and Jews in Chelsea, Massachusetts back then.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where he grew up. He had a lot of Jewish friends, I guess. But my mom grew up Baptist, but went to a church in Chinatown and so forth, the Baptist church there. And she liked Reverend Keaty. That's why Reverend Keaty, who knocked on, like a lot of, you grew up in a small town. I grew up in a suburb of Boston called Norwood, Massachusetts, 20,000 people. And, the local minister and the preachers, they knock on your door and say, hey, welcome to the neighborhood, kind of a thing. And so she liked Reverend Keaty. The door was knocked on by several of the local ministers, and she liked him. And plus he had a son named Alan, who was my age. So she thought, oh, great, we gotta get somebody for Kelvin to play with. Now Kelvin's 4.5 years old, whatever. So I think that was the level of Christian discernment that we had the selection process. So yeah, she was somewhat Christian, but not really. They weren't like all in. And like you say,
yeah. Well, the reason I brought it up is because one of the things I find that's really interesting or different about your teaching is it's not based upon, and you're very clear on this, it's not based upon believing something. It's not based upon, it's empirical, it's based upon evidence, it's based upon logic, it's based upon reason. And so it's something that anybody can relate to, regardless of whatever your religious background happens to be, or non-religious background.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I start out my classes saying what Brian just said, is that I am not here to change people's beliefs about stuff. I have a overcoming the fear of death nonprofit organization, and that's what it's called, Overcoming the Fear of Death. You can Google those words, and I'm the first, Google search result, Overcoming the Fear of Death. And that's actually the title of my first book. So this is my first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, and in that book, and I tell people in all my sessions, when I do sessions with people from around the world who have a fear of death, they'll find me online, because that's, like I said, they'll type in Overcoming their fear of death, and my website pops up. I tell people, no, it's not about me changing your belief system, but I can help you reduce your fear, reduce it, and overcome your fear about death and dying. But it's not about changing people's belief system. That's not my approach. So I embrace people's belief. And like Brian said, you can believe in an afterlife or not believe in an afterlife. And if you're just curious to know what people think about afterlife, you could take my class. So it's not a prerequisite to even believe in an afterlife or reincarnation or any of this stuff, or heaven, whatever you want to call the afterlife. You don't have to believe in God. I work with atheists, agnostics, people who are devout, people who are in between. It doesn't really matter where people are at belief system-wise. I'm here to help people live life more happily, reduce their suffering, and increase the clarity of their thinking. And I think clarity of thinking is really something that worldwide, not just here in the United States, but worldwide, that's an issue where we need to get greater clarity of thinking about a lot of things, not just about what we're talking about today, but everything in life. We need to be, I'll just stand on a soapbox and say one sentence. I think from a humanity standpoint, what would be greatly beneficial to reducing suffering in the world for all of humanity is reducing, I don't know if reducing is correct word, but not having total reliance on how we feel and how we intuit things, and balancing that, not eradicating, not getting rid of that, but balancing that with an increased ability to have understanding about concepts and ideas. So if you think about that one sentence that I just said, balancing, not having total reliance on feelings and intuition, but instead balancing that with an increase in our understanding of concepts and ideas, humanity would benefit immensely from that balance. So I'm not anti-intuition and anti-feeling. Brian, you know me. I'm a very passionate person.
Yeah.
Feeling and intuition are very important. Getting a sense, got a feeling, got a gut feeling. It's very important. Problem is, most people rely on that almost exclusively, and at the exclusion of understanding concepts and ideas more clearly, and therefore basing their decision-making on a more rational and logical way. And that's where cognitive dissonance, where we think certain things, but they're inconsistent, comes up. And to me, that's the root cause of suffering. Cognitive dissonance.
I know you and I have had several conversations about a lot of myths that exist, both inconsistency that materialists have, and also people who are, quote, spiritual.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people in the spiritual world that have gone too far with certain concepts or certain ideas. And I've come to you with certain things, and you're like, okay, well, let's think about this logically. And logically, some of the things people are teaching just don't make sense.
Right.
And that's where that, as you said, that cognitive dissonance comes in place, where it's like we've gone to the other extreme, where we're like, instead of becoming materialist, but now we've said, okay, well, I'm just going to believe this because it feels good.
Right. Yeah, and I call that spiritual materialism. So people who are, and I talk about that concept, this is in my second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, little pitch here.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a collection of 67 essays that I've written on all different concepts and ideas. One of the ideas that I wrote about in those 67 essays is this idea of spiritual materialism, which is what I kind of sum up in those two words in what Brian just described, where people have gone too far in some people, not everybody, but many people in the spiritual communities have gone too far, and they've rejected materialism in terms of financial, or how many shoes do you own and what kind of car do you drive. And I agree with that. That's a materialistic view of our material, our physical material world. But we can equally be materialistic in the spiritual communities and our spiritual experiences by labeling certain experiences as better or worse, or that's really an NDE. And I at the conference that I spoke at, where we met Brian, in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, I mean, I heard people walking by them in the lobby saying, "Oh, that person didn't really have a real
Yeah.
NDE."
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, my NDE or that person's NDE was a real NDE." No, that's a spiritual materialistic view of spirituality. It's the same mentality that drives the person who says my BMW is better than your Mercedes or your Ford Fiesta or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same mentality. It's materialistic. And I teach something that's very different. I teach discernment so we can see when that's happening. And I'm not perfect. We all have been guilty of these things in our own lives in different ways. But can we discern and see when we are leaning that way or this way, and catch ourselves? Because
Right.
if we do, then we will have a happier life, and we will be not so cruel to other people, hurtful to other people. We will catch ourselves. And so to me, that's where the rubber meets the road in life, is not looking for a perfect Kelvin or a perfect Brian or a perfect Lauren or perfect whoever,
Mm-hmm.
and not judging people in that metric, in that using that yardstick, but instead, how can we think more clearly and move and improve our lives and move more in a forward direction, as opposed to moving or backwards or staying kind of stagnant. And it's true. It is absolutely true that a soul can incarnate on planet Earth and move backwards. All right. The notion that people are always coming here to learn lessons and they're moving forward and everybody's moving forward and everybody can move everybody else forward is a myth. People make choices. And if you look around, in your life, and you go to Costco and you go to the supermarket, you go to Ralph's out here in LA, the supermarket, and you walk down the aisles, and you tell me that everybody you see is a conscious, aware being who's here, choosing to learn life lessons. You have to learn life lessons consciously. That's where the rubber meets the road, really. Yeah, you can kind of fall into certain situations and learn from them. But the more consciously aware one is, the more lessons one's going to learn from that situation. So these kind of concepts is something that in my class that I said that I'm going to be teaching. I only teach it once or twice a year now, by the way. So September 29th is starting this next series on afterlife and reincarnation experiences. I'm not sure in 2025 yet when I'm going to teach it again. But I debunk some of these myths. And by clarifying and debunking some of these myths that Brian has kind of alluded to, it helps promote happiness and contentment and peace in the individual, as opposed to promoting some inconsistent thinking that doesn't fit, that can then eventually, if continued, lead to pain and suffering and anxiety in the person's life, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that there's so many things about it that I enjoy when I take it. One is for me, at the years that I've known you, is helping really with that clarity of thinking. Unlearning. There's a lot of unlearning, and I remember when I took Turning Within from you, your meditation technique. I was like, there's so much unlearning to do, and I would ask you like, how do I do this? And you're like, okay, you've got to sometimes get rid of some of these concepts that we come in with. And one of the ones you just point out, I think it was really, really important, is this idea that everybody here is always moving forward. And as you said, we can look around and see maybe not everybody is. I like your analogy. It's like, well, if this is a school, remember when you were in school, not everybody was paying attention. So even if
Yeah,
this is a school, some people are just kind of like sleeping through.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I have some friends who I know from a couple thousand years ago who are afraid to move forward.
Mm,
And they're more familiar and comfortable with staying in that same mode, we'll call it, of thinking and believing and so forth that they were 2,000 years ago. And it's not my place to change them or anybody. Have I had conversations? Yes, as a,
mhm.
with a friend and saying, really, you're complaining about this, and you complained about this a couple thousand years ago again, and what have you done about changing that? If you really want to change that, that's for them to do. But so again, that's an example of how we can have conversation with people. I'm not saying we don't have conversation and make suggestions to people, but everybody is unique and independent. And some people choose to stay in the familiar pattern, emotional, behavioral, energetic, whatever you want to call it, pattern that they've been in for thousands of years, even though they may say, I'm coming back to Earth to move forward.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And another thing I really like about the when I've taken, and it's just not this I've done with you, we've done several things, but you
yeah.
encourage discussion, you encourage people to question, and it's a very interactive environment. It's not just like Kelvin sitting down and reading a slide deck.
No, no, it's interactive. I want people to share their own experiences and their own questions and their doubts and and in addition to their doubts, their own aha experiences or epiphanies, those awakening moments that they've had in their own life, because it's good for everybody in the group to hear that. It's not just about me talking about me. I want it to be, I use my own lens, obviously, because they're my experiences, and then I've interpreted them and so forth, and I use them as teaching tools. But that's not the point. The point is to open the conversation up so people start self-reflecting. Because last I checked, the word self-development has the word self in it. And so that means each of ourselves. My self-development is not Brian's business. He can help me, and he may make suggestions, but it's up to me to listen or not listen to that, and it's up to me to do something or not do something about it. It's my self-development. Each of us is on our own paths, and I respect that. But yeah, the open community, we could call it discussion, that happens in these sessions is great. And sometimes the sessions go pretty long because, you know, uh, people just keep wanting to keep sharing
Yeah.
and asking more
Well,
questions.
and that brings up another point because people come back, they don't just take this once. Some of the same people come back over and over again.
Yeah, a lot of people. I started doing this in 2018 when I moved back to Los Angeles here. It's my third time living in Los Angeles. So this is 2018. I started doing it. So this is my 18th time teaching this, which brings up another point. Every time I teach this, I have some students who've taken this, and this is their 18th time taking it. Now, not
Hmm.
everybody gets that. It's up to them, but they'll tell you that every time I do it, I bring up something new. And it's not just part of that's different people coming in, and they'll ask different questions, of course, that'll come up. But I get different insights, and sometimes I'll get a visitation. Sometimes I'll tell you, sometimes I won't. During the sessions, I'll get a communication from some of the beings who I've been communicating with for the last 40 something years, in this lifetime anyway, on the other side, and they'll stick their ideas in, and they'll boom. So that'll come in. That happens sometimes in the sessions too. I don't consider myself a medium. Some of you guys are probably wondering that. Well, he's saying this, that, and the other thing. Is he a medium? I don't consider myself a medium. I consider everybody a potential medium for themselves, and potentially for other people too. Sometimes I'll tell somebody if I get a hit, I call it a hit on some, about somebody that's really like, I think it'll be very useful for them. I might share that with them. But I don't do that kind of work. I'm not a psychic medium type person. I am, as Brian said at the beginning, I'm more into helping people be independent. I want to help you be your own medium. So this class has sometimes helped people open up more to the other side and their own past life memories or communicating with their dead loved ones and so forth and so on. The meditation, as we already said, has also sometimes has helped people that in that way. And there, you can go on my YouTube channel and you can scroll down and in the different playlists, and you can find some videos of some of my meditation students explicitly talking about that benefit, connecting with their dead child and so forth. In one case, yeah, but yeah, the classes are meant to be self-development classes to help you develop yourself. That's, people may be curious about my past lives and so forth, and reading this book about my past lives. Really, what I want people to take away from reading this, my most recent book on past lives, my past lives, it's called After the Afterlife, is not so much who Kelvin Chin was, but the thread that goes through this book is about my personality traits that I gleaned about myself over the last 50 years as these memories have resurfaced that come from the last 6,000 years. That's the teaching takeaway, and that's what I'm going to spend more time on in this particular series starting on September 29th compared to other times that I've done it. So I'm telling people right now who've registered that their homework is to read this before, ideally, before I get to the reincarnation session in session 3 of the series, which is what, 4 5 6 weeks into the series. I get into that, my past life memories. I'm going to spend less time talking about my past lives and more time talking about the personality traits that came out of that, which I'm going to talk about in greater detail also in session 6. But I may move around some of the stuff that you've seen, Brian, from session 6 to session 3, and talk less about my past lives and more about what the takeaways were. Okay. Yeah. So I'm rejigging things around a little bit in the 6-part series. So why don't we talk just briefly, and then you can make some more comments and ask me some questions. But the 6-part series goes like this. The first session is what happens after we die. What happens when we die? So I'm going to talk about different concepts and different ideas and different experiences that I've had from my own memories and from my experiences being on the other side. I don't have to have an NDE to be on the other side anymore. So I can just go. The veil is very transparent to me. People talk about the veil, between here and there. So what happens when we die? One of the things we'll talk about is this concept of time. And it's really, it's a very misunderstood idea that you'll hear spiritual teachers say incorrectly all the time, that time doesn't exist on the other side. No, time exists. They just don't understand what time is. And so we'll talk about what time is and how it exists on the other side as different from being here on this side. Yes, it's different. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, okay? And because that misunderstanding gives rise to all kinds of other theories that are incorrect and can cause suffering. The second session we talk about is, can we get glimpses into the other side? And the short answer is yes. We can say to this group, obviously. The short answer is yes, we can get glimpses into the other side. Out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences are glimpses into the other side, obviously, near-death experiences. Other spiritually transformative experiences that don't fall into the NDE category can also be glimpses into the other side. So we'll talk about that. The third session is about reincarnation. Can it happen? Yes, it can. We can say that to the group right now. Yes, reincarnation can and does happen. Does it always have to happen? Do you have to come back here? The short answer is no. You don't have to come back if you don't want to. So there's a whole myth out there that you've got to come back until you've learned these lessons and da 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 da. No, there's no school marmy approach to the universe. All right. There's
Now
no
you're giving it all away, Kelvin.
Yeah, I'm giving it away. But we'll get into this in greater detail, right? And then the fourth thing, rewards and punishment. That's a big one for a lot of people, especially our Christian friends and our mutual Christian friends that we come out. You and I know. Let's say that you and I, Brian, we
Yes,
come out of that
absolutely.
tradition. But it's not just isolated to the Christians. But we're in America, and most of my audience tends to be American and UK. So mostly, but I'll have Muslims in my classes too. And there's a lot of rewards and punishment in every religion. Okay. I have Buddhists in my class who are afraid that they're going to come back as a mosquito. Okay. They believe in reincarnation, but they have fears about that, And so we get into that whole hell, karma, dharma, sin conversation and so forth in that session. The fifth session is, can our friends and loved ones communicate with us from the other side? Of course they can. We've talked about that, but we'll get into that in much more detail about how that happens, what different ways that they can, and so forth and so on. The last session, we talk about what parts of us continue. So we talk in the first session about, we're going to, what happens after we die, where there is continuation, spoiler alert, we talk about that. But in the last session, what parts of us can continue after we biologically die? Because, you could arguably say we never die because something continues. But what is continuing? And then is it eternal? And what does eternity mean? And so we talk about this concept of eternity in the last session. What about soul plans? Can you have soul plans? Can you get together with friends and loved ones on the other side and come back in together? We talk about that. And do soul plans always work out? We talk about that. So we get into the permutations and the nuances, the kind of gray areas. There's a lot of gray area in all of this stuff when we're talking about afterlife and reincarnation stuff. There's a lot of gray area. And I get into the gray areas with you. I don't just do the broad brush like a lot of people do. Okay, Brian?
Yeah, well, you just covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about because I've learned so much from you, like the karma, dharma, sin thing, because there are a lot of religions that teach, even though we know famously Christianity and Islam teach hell, but even some other religions teach, karma and dharma, and there's this idea of the universe balancing things out. I know another one we had some really deep discussions about is, do we merge into the one?
Right.
And some very famous spiritual teachers teach that that we merge into the one. And again, I'm not going to spoil the whole teaching, but I love the way you help us to think through these things, in a logical, common sense kind of approach. And every time, and I've been taking it off pretty much every time you've taught it, I at least drop in on a few, and it's always different, and I always learn something more whenever I do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very organic. That's why, I have a structure and, I have material because, it's everything. It's about the afterlife and reincarnation. Every session is going to touch on it, obviously, but I broke it up into these 6 sessions so that we have some focus of that particular session, but it moves. It's organic and it depends on who's in the audience at the time and what their interest is that week of the session. And then they'll bring up a question, and it doesn't necessarily have to only be on the topic we're talking then. And then the conversation will go wherever. And then and as a teacher, I mean, you're a teacher, Brian, anybody in the audience who's listening to this, knows that the teacher, if you've been a teacher, the teacher always gets more out of it than the student. The teacher has to listen to the student. The student asks a question, and then the teacher has to go, okay, based on this and this and this that I know, how does that apply to this? And it makes the teacher think about things differently so that as a teacher, I will sometimes come up with stuff that I've never said before
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a class
Yeah.
because somebody's never asked me that almost same question, almost slightly differently. And it
Yeah.
makes me think about the concept of the idea or the question or whatever it is, the experience slightly differently. And so my answer comes out sometimes very differently. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about you've covered the structure a little bit, but I want to review it for
Yeah.
people. So it starts on September 29th. We're in 2024 as we're recording this.
Yeah.
It's every other week for 6 weeks at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, 1 o'clock Eastern time.
Right.
And how do people sign up for it and what's the cost?
Yeah. So people sign up for it. They go to kelvinchin.org, just my name. Uh, it, it's Kelvin, not Kevin, although I grew up in Boston and my basketball coach in high school called me Kevin. But anyway, uh, Kelly, he called me Kelly is what he called me because he kept calling me Kevin. We changed my name to Kelly. He could remember that. So it's kelvinchin.org. You go there and you'll see the page. It'll say Afterlife and Reincarnation series. Go to that page, and that's where you can register. Um, and basically, name, address, email address, and give me your cell phone number if you want me to text you reminders and so forth. You'll get a recording after every session also, if you register. Everybody who's registered gets a recording. You can watch the recording over and over again. It's on my YouTube channel, but it's not publicly available, the recording. You have to have the link.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, and so that means if you miss a session, you get the recording. So you may not be there live for every session. That's okay. You can get the recording afterwards. The cost, I charge $150 for all 6 sessions. You get the whole thing, $150. And once people have already taken the session, the 6-part series of sessions, they just have to pay $50. I call it my alumni rate. So it all goes to my nonprofit. These are basically donations to my nonprofit to help my nonprofit keep teaching people worldwide. Because I never turn anybody away for financial reasons, for whether it's teaching my meditation class, teaching this class, teaching any of my classes where there's a fee. I never turn anybody away for financial reasons. So people who can pay are helping the other people who cannot pay. And not only that, but especially in countries whose economy is not like the United States, countries where annual income is $200 or $300 a year or $500 a year. That's their annual income is 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 US dollars per year. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to charge them my US rates that we're talking about, right? And I teach them anyway, 68 countries. And that includes people in the United States who are out of work and, fixed income, whatever. They have their own financial issues. Here in the United States, I never turn anybody away for financial reasons, bottom line. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I've got to say you're very generous with first of all with what you're charging for the class to begin with, because it's
yeah,
it's 2 hour every time I've been on, it's been at least 2 hours.
two
So
hours.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, 6 2 hour sessions, and then also you can come back and take the other ones for a very reasonable rate afterwards.
exactly.
So I think I've enjoyed it, or I've gotten so much out of it. And if people that listen to my podcast and listen to me, they hear me refer to you all the time because I've learned so much from you over the years. So what I like to do, that we have a few people here live. If you're here live and you have any questions that you want to ask Kelvin while we've got him here, I'm going to open it up to you.
Great. Lauren, are you unmuted? I think so.
I'm here, and I appreciate everything, and I'm definitely going to take a look at your class. I don't have any questions right now. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I just saw that you were unmuted. So yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Well, I'll we can talk for a few minutes, but if anybody does have a question, or you want to make a comment, go ahead, feel free to chime in.
Right.
But as we're wrapping up, I think Kelvin's done a really good job of explaining what it is that he's offering. I'm obviously an advocate of it, which is why Kelvin and I are doing this, because I've taken Kelvin's Turning Within meditation class, as I've said, and I've also taken the Afterlife class. Been sat in on several times, and as much as I'd studied the afterlife all the way up until this point, I'm still learning a lot, and I'm still, busting myths. Some of these myths that we've been taught to believe in, even as we feel like we're becoming more advanced spiritually and moving on to different teachers, some of them are still teaching us things that just don't really add up.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody is well intentioned. So when I bust myths, I don't get critical personally about another spiritual teacher's myths, because everybody's doing the best they can. They're well intentioned, but they may not have thought it through as thoroughly as needed. And so I've pretty much thought through stuff. I don't know everything about everything. I don't think anybody can ever know everything about everything. I think that's not possible. If in fact we are eternal souls always growing,
Yeah.
and it's improving, then by definition you can't know everything about everything.
Well,
But
that's another logical fallacy that you talk about, the idea of omnipotence or omniscience.
omniscient,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, it means that, well, like one of the illogical things that you immediately can point to is, if you know everything about it, if you're omniscient, that must mean you must know what it's like to know nothing, because that's something to know. So no, you can't know nothing about, you can't know what it's like to know nothing. So if you're omniscient, so it's always growth and so forth. But my point is that um, I'm here to help people, and to the extent that I can point out certain dissonant, inconsistent stuff, what Brian's calling myths and so forth, that may exist in some spiritual teachings and so forth, I do that, but not just to show that there's a mistake there in the thinking, but my goal always is to improve the quality of our lives and our happiness and the peacefulness in our life, and to reduce our suffering, because it's not about pointing out, oh, somebody messed up here, somebody messed up there. It's that messing up in the thinking, long term and sometimes short term, can cause pain and suffering. And I'm the anti-anxiety, anti-pain and suffering guy.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
my objective. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm not going to I'm not going to give away everything now, but Kelvin and I have had a lot of really good conversations. I remember coming back from a conference a couple of years ago, and someone was teaching something very well intentioned, but not understanding the kind of anxiety that this particular teaching could cause. And a lot of these things are well intentioned, like the idea of, I will give an example, the idea of karma.
Yeah.
Sounds great, right? The reason why people brought that up is because it's going to make people be better, because they have a fear that if they're not good, then they're going to be punished. But it also causes a lot of unnecessary suffering for a lot of people. So Kelvin, again, helps people. Everything that I've ever learned from you has been in pursuit of thinking more clearly, reducing suffering, reducing anxiety. And I found, like, when it comes to death, when it comes to everything, we fear what we don't know. And
Yes.
we also ironically turn away from what we don't know. So in our culture, we don't think about death, we don't study death, therefore we fear it. And the more that you lean into it, the more that you understand about it, the more the fear goes away.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. That's it in a nutshell, right? Fear reduces our ability to live life fully, and it diverts our energy, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to reduce our fears about stuff, and a lot of that sometimes fears are based on just not shining a light on something clearly enough. The classic analogy that sometimes people use is, you go into a dark room, and most people are analyzing the darkness, and they step on something on the floor and they're freaked out because they're convinced that there's a snake on the floor. And then somebody goes in and says, well, you know, have you ever heard about a light switch? And you turn the light switch on and you see that the snake on the floor was a rope
Yeah.
that somebody stepped on. And so that kind of, you know, shining a light, making things more clearly understood is what I try to do in my classes.
Yeah, I think I love that analogy. I hadn't heard that from you before, but I think that's awesome. It is shining a light. Shining a light drives out the fear.
Yep, yep, yep. Lynette, did you have something? Anything?
I did. I got in late because of work and just wanted to know if this recording was going to be where I could look at like the first half of it later.
Yes.
Oh, this.
Yeah. Well, we'll make it available. Sure.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. So
Yeah.
sorry I was late.
Oh, those things happen. That's why
okay.
we have the recording.
And then the
Good.
other thing, just to underscore something I briefly mentioned, on the kelvinchin.org website, my website, on the Afterlife, you know, Afterlife series page, there's a couple of short videos of me talking in more detail about what I'm going to talk about in the class. So they're like previews. So, and there's a bunch of testimonials there you can read from people who've taken the class, because as I said at the beginning, this is the 18th time I'm teaching this class over the last 6 years. So I just created this in 2018, this series. But there's a lot of, you'll see other people giving their comments of what their takeaways from the class and how it was different from other afterlife classes that they've taken, you know, before they took mine.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have I think we kind of covered everything. So
yeah.
Again, I appreciate you doing this, and I'm happy to share this with people. Hopefully
Yeah.
people will at least check it out. And you said I know you guys scheduled now. We don't know when it's going to be the next time, so this is a good time to take it. Even if you
Right.
can't, you might look at your calendar and say, I can't make all 6 sessions. There are recordings, so I encourage people to go ahead and sign up.
Exactly. Yep. They can watch the recording. I have some people who they're not even there live the whole 6 sessions. And they just, because of work or whatever other commitments, it's usually work. They're working every Sunday at time. And so they just watch the 6-part series, and they send me questions in between.
Yeah.
The sessions. They'll email me questions, and then I'll answer their question live, obviously, in the next session, but they're not there. So some people do that, and that's fine. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, Kelvin, man, good to see you again. Everybody who's here, thanks for being here. For people listening to the recording, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, everybody.
All right.